Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. This is part 2 of our video about NATO aircraft shot down over Bosnia during the conflict in that country. In the previous video we discussed the loss of an Italian transport G222 near Sarajevo and a Royal Navy Sea Harrier at Gorazde. The next NATO aircraft shoot down over Bosnia was the most famous one. The date is 2nd June 1995 and we're flying with US Air Force Captain Scott O'Grady. He took off from Aviano Air Base in Italy as number 2 in a flight of 2 F-16s with Captain Robert Wilbur Wright as the flight leader. The two pilots were assigned to the 555th Fighter Squadron known as Triple Nickel. They were taking part in Operation Deny Flight, and the goal of the operation was to prevent any of the three warring sides to use their aircraft for military purposes. However, Bosnian Serbs were the ones most affected by it because they were the ones with the largest air power. In fact, they were the only ones to operate fixed-wing aircraft, left to them by the former Yugoslav People's Army. The no-fly zone had only been enforced once. On 28 February 1994, American F-16s were credited with shooting down 4 Serbian attack aircraft. In fact, Captain O'Grady and his flight leader, Captain Wright, were involved in this incident. Captain Wright shot down 3 Serbian airplanes, while Captain O'Grady damaged one with a Sidewinder missile. Serbs were anxious to avenge the lost pilots. Captains Wright and O'Grady were flying oval patterns over western Bosnia at 27,000 feet. This was O'Grady's 47th sortie, and it was expected to be a routine. The only real threat to the American pilots was coming from radar-guided surface-to-air missiles from the army of Bosnian Serbs. The most dangerous system they had was called KUB, but it's commonly known under its western designation SA-6. Even though it was no longer state-of-the-art technology, it still had the potential to destroy advanced aircraft such as F-16. NATO intelligence was aware of Serbian SA-6 sites on 2 locations, and their fighters avoided them on their patrols. What they didn't know was that 3 days earlier, one SA-6 battery belonging to the 155th Missile Brigade was secretly moved to a location where NATO fighters were expected to orbit. It was placed in the region of Bosanski Petrovac, and it waited without engaging its radars. Wright and O'Grady reached Bingo Fuel, then went to refuel over the Adriatic Sea and came back to Bosnian airspace. At one point, the 2 F-16s approached the SA-6 battery, and it finally turned its search radar on. Captain Wright, call sign Basher 5-1, noticed it on his radar warning receiver and called it over the radio. O'Grady, call sign Basher 5-2, replied that his warning system wasn't picking up anything.
Basher 5-1, Bud 6 bearing 090. Basher 5-2,
After several seconds, AWACS came in saying, Basher 5-1, your MUD-6 report is uncorrelated. This meant that they couldn't confirm where the radar signal was coming from. As the warning only lasted very briefly, Wright and O'Grady continued flying their oval patterns, thinking that it might have been a false alarm. If you watch the episode of National Geographic's documentary series called Situation Critical, you might get the impression that the Serbian SAM battery deliberately turned off after a few seconds because they only needed this brief burst to get the basic flight parameters of their targets. However, according to a text written by a Serbian analyst, Andrej Mlakar, the radar was turned off because the F-16's path placed them behind a mountain and they couldn't be attacked. About 15 minutes later, the F-16s came back within the range of the SAM battery. This time it was O'Grady who got warning. Soon the system indicated that O'Grady's plane was locked up. He He looked outside, attempting to locate a missile, and he finally saw one passing between him and his lead. He then thought about flying evasive maneuvers and launching countermeasures. Before he could initiate any of that, he felt the force and noise of a direct impact. The missile hit the belly of his airplane. O'Grady managed to eject, but it took him more than 20 minutes to land. He saw vehicles loaded with Serb soldiers who were obviously there to capture or kill him. Fortunately for him, wind blew him away. He was able to hide, but he made a big mistake. He forgot to take the survival kit containing additional water, signal flares, spare radio batteries, etc. He only had the items stored in his vest. As for the shootdowns, sources differ a little. According to some, 2 missiles were launched at O'Grady without guidance, and it was only switched on at the last moment, 5 seconds before the impact. Serbian source I mentioned before doesn't talk about that. It only says that the tracking radar was on for 26 seconds. It also claims that both missiles hit, with the second one hitting parts of the aircraft. O'Grady, however, testifies in his book that he saw the first missile pass between the 2 F-16s. I'm not an expert on SAM systems, but the last moment guidance story makes sense, because earlier engagement would have given O'Grady enough time to at least disperse some chaff. In reality, he took no measures other than trying to locate the missiles visually. Feel free to comment if you know more about the subject. NATO had no information about O'Grady's destiny for days. Captain Wright didn't see his parachute, but fighters kept flying over Bosnia and listened for possible signals. O'Grady decided to switch his radio to beacon mode instead of voice. This would give him a much greater range. On the other hand, this could also give his position away to Serbs. His colleagues might be suspicious because a beacon could easily be a trap. O'Grady was moving and he was no longer near a location where he was shut down, which made it even more suspicious. 6 days have passed and we're currently flying with Captain Thomas Hanford of the 510th Squadron. He has just completed his no-fly patrol and he was flying near the Adriatic coast when he picked up O'Grady's beacon. He responded by 3 clicks. Even though he was low on fuel, he decided to approach and try voice communication. After a lot of trying and flying on the edge of a SAM engagement zone, he finally heard O'Grady's voice.
Basher 5-2, this is Basher 1-1 on Alpha.
Basher 5-2, would you want to clear half 5 minutes?
I can barely hear you. Say call sign.
Still south, Basher 5-2, Basher 5-2.
Understand you are Basher 5-2. What's going on? Okay, you are breaking up now. Basher 5-2, this is Basher 1-1. You're loud and clear.
I'm alive.
Copy that, you're alive. Good to hear your voice.
Hemford asked some questions which confirmed that this was really O'Grady, and NATO now had a confirmation that he was alive. Rescue operation was prepared and US Marines were given the task. The Marine Task Force came from USS Kearsarge, and its core consisted of 2 AH-1 Super Cobras, 2 CH-53 Super Stallions, and 2 Harriers. Additional aircraft from aircraft carriers and Aviano were tasked with fighter cover, electronic warfare, and so on. The rescue force was able to reach O'Grady's location. Low clouds and fog made things difficult on one hand, but on the other it protected him from anti-aircraft defense. O'Grady was picked up and the helicopters continued initially with no problems. However, at one point a missile was launched at them. This was followed by small arms fire which damaged the helicopter O'Grady was in. The flight reached Kearsarge nevertheless and the rescue operation was a success. This event changed the operational procedure of NATO flights over Bosnia. SEAD support was accompanying fighters and minimum altitude limits were imposed. But the war in Bosnia was about to escalate further, and Operation Deny Flight would make room for a more proactive Operation Deliberate Force. Date is now 30th August 1995, and Operation Deliberate Force has just started. It involved about 400 NATO aircraft from 8 member nations, and it lasted until 20th September. The main objective was to stop Bosnian Serbs from attacking UN safe areas and to force them into some kind of a peace agreement. One of the nations involved in Operation Deliberate Force was France. It contributed aircraft such as Mirage F-1, Jaguar, and Mirage 2000 based in land bases, and Superette and Darts based on 2 aircraft carriers. We are currently flying a Mirage 2000 from Champagne Squadron that took off from Cervia Air Base. The variant was a 2-seater N model flown by Captain Frédéric Chiffot and Lieutenant José Manuel Souvignet. The N model was originally designed for a nuclear strike role, but only later it was converted for conventional role too. In DCS world we only have the single-seat C model, so we're flying that one to represent the N model. The target the French crew was supposed to hit was an ammunition depot near the town of Pale. The crew managed to drop their bombs, but immediately after that, their aircraft was hit by a shoulder-launched missile, SA-7 Strela. Two crew members ejected successfully, but each of them broke a leg, and they were soon captured by Serb forces. Several unsuccessful rescue operations were launched. On one of them, 2 crew members of an MH-53 helicopter were injured by ground fire. French pilots were only released after almost 4 months of captivity and a lot of negotiations. They resumed their Air Force careers, and Souvignet ejected once again in 2008, this time without injuries. The French Mirage was the only NATO aircraft shot down during the Operation Deliberate Force. Throughout NATO operations over Bosnia, 2 more aircraft were lost for mechanical problems. A couple of drones were destroyed, but this might be a story for another video. If you like this one, be sure to press the like button. If you're able to, you can support the channel on Patreon. Subscribe if you haven't already, and keep watching Showtime 112.